Everybody, I'd like to welcome you to the second presentation of the season in our Speaking of History series. Today we're excited to host Lu Vickers, who will be presenting Cypress Gardens, America's Tropical Wonderland. We'd like to thank the Pinellas County Historical Society for sponsoring the Speaking of History series, Pinellas County TV crew for recording this event, and of course, thank you to Lu Vickers. Lu Vickers is the recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship for Fiction, 2 Florida Book Awards, and 3 individual artist fellowships for fiction. She is the author of the novel Breathing Underwater and 4 nonfiction books, Cypress Gardens, America's Tropical Wonderland, How Dick Pope Invented Florida, Remembering Paradise Park, Tourism and Segregation at Silver Springs, Wiki Wachi, City of Mermaids, A History of one of Florida's oldest roadside attractions, and Wiki Wachi Mermaids, 30 Years of Underwater Photography. And without further ado, Lu Vickers.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank the Pinellas County History Society for inviting me to come down. I guess you can tell I love Florida. I've been a Floridian obviously my entire life, except for a couple little moments when I left the state to go other places. But Florida's my home, and I was drawn to all these attractions mainly because I lived in North Florida. And when my mom and dad, they had 4 kids, and so we kind of stayed in North Florida because they didn't have a lot of money to drive us all over the state. But I would see these brochures, for Cypress Gardens or Wiki Wachi, and always wanted to go and didn't really get to go till I was an adult. I had done a book on Wiki Wachi and was driving around one day, and I heard on the NPR they were talking about the fact that Cypress Gardens was going to close. And I had never been there, so I said, well, I better go on down there now. And so I did, and kind of fell in love with the idea of Dick Pope. He's known as the man who invented Florida. He's the guy that created all the hype. He was a genius of marketing. And so I decided to write the book, and the book kept getting bigger and bigger. And in fact, toward the end of the book, when I was done, I thought I was done, and then Legoland came along. And my editor said, you have to write a different ending, because now Lego. So I went to the day they announced and was down there for that. So I started the slideshow with a photograph of Elvis, probably as you've never seen him, right, in a swimsuit. This photograph was at Cypress Gardens on their wall of fame, I guess, The story goes is that he came down, but I couldn't find anyone that actually saw him there. And but the story goes is that Elvis wanted to come to Cypress Gardens. He didn't want a lot of hoopla, and so he did it on the sly, and he went skiing and had a good time. When he went to Wiki Wachi, apparently girls from all over the country went to Wiki Wachi too and trampled all the flowers there. So I'm sure Dick Pope was fine with him coming on the sly because he didn't want him tearing up the scenery out there. Do y'all recognize these 2 people? That's the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. They were really good friends with Dick Pope. Apparently, Dick Pope knew everyone. When I was doing research on him, I'm like, was there anyone he didn't know? He just got around and knew everybody. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor came to Winter Haven multiple times to go to Cypress Gardens. And there was even a little newspaper article about how they stayed at some little roadside motel and how the locals would drive by, to try to get a glimpse of them. And that little motel's still there, not as fancy as it was probably back in the day. Do y'all see that guy? That's, can y'all see him? That's Tiny Tim. Of course he went to the tulip section. And this next person is Aunt Jemima. Back in those days, the Aunt Jemima Pancake Company actually had a person who would dress as Aunt Jemima and go around and do promotions. And so there were actually a couple of photos of her as Aunt Jemima, but there was also an image of her on the boat as herself, so she got to go in there and visit. And that is, y'all know who that is? Yeah. So she went down there a lot, and in fact, she stayed at this hotel called the Lake Roy Hotel, and by the time I got there, it was a little seedy. But I stayed there too, y'all, where Carol Burnett stayed. And it was on the lake, and apparently she went skiing all the time, and the skiers loved her. They would take her out and do all the stunts with her because she really enjoyed that. And here's another movie star. Yeah, Bette Davis. And so he had his hand in so many different enterprises, from film, Hollywood, the orange industry, the asparagus industry, every industry you can think of, Dick Pope was involved in. And so in the beginning, though, he was a real estate guy. And his father, Dick Pope Sr., was J. Walker Pope is actually his name. He was a millionaire. And that area was famous for millionaires. They had a lot of millionaires, more millionaires per capita than any other place in the state. And so they owned a company called Haven Villa. And this is in the early 1900s, 1900s all the way to the 20s. And it was the first Florida boom when real estate was really, really happening, okay? And so they would do these big ads in New York Times and all these northern newspapers and get people to come down. And then they would have these real estate agents that would meet them at the train, and then take them around and show them everything and do kinds of crazy stuff. And some of the crazy things they did are in this picture here, because Dick Pope, on these lakes, the Winter Haven, as you know, is home to the chain of lakes. There's a lot of lakes there. And so they were doing water sports as a way of attracting people to buy property. That's one of the techniques he used. And it wouldn't be any surprise to find out later that Dick Pope ran the publicity for Seahorse Motors. He was totally involved in boats and engines and lakes and everything. So that was one of those early strange machines they did. There's actually a video of Dick Pope on one of these things. Apparently it was made from an airplane wing that they fashioned into some kind of flying machine and took it out on the lake. That's Winter Haven. And I think this might be a photo of Dick Pope or his brother Malcolm doing some stunts down there, because they had the Haven Villa club down there. They had yachting things and motorboat races and stuff on the lake. And it was for entertainment, but like I said, it was also to draw in people to buy property. That's what they were trying to do, is look at all these things we have. You can do property. And they were inventing sports, water flivvering. They were jumping over ramps. His brother Malcolm Pope, was actually a kind of a famous race boater. He was in all these races all over the country in these motorboats. This is a photo of one of the stunts they did, jumping through a wall of fire, which doesn't seem like a good idea. And that's probably, at a time when Dick Pope was working for Seahorse and advertising them. And these are some more of these early photographs from the early days when they were trying to attract people down to Florida. This was the original clubhouse, and it was there later when Dick Pope created Cypress Gardens. Originally, this was just a place for the yachting club. It was called the 100 Lakes Club. And so they built this building as a clubhouse, and they would have all these events out there. And these are some of the workers. What Dick Pope decided when he was in Florida, he decided to create a garden for the city of Winter Haven, okay? And he said he wanted to create a beautiful spot. He loved gardens. I think he really truly did. Obviously, he created Cypress Gardens, right? So what he did is he got the WPA to give them money to clear out the property there. And you can see some of the guys out there working on the property, cleaning it and stuff, and draining it, which I'm sure they would not be able to do today. They dredged it and made the little canals and things, which they would later use for the boats. What happened, though, is the city got wind of the fact that they thought this was more of a private enterprise for Dick Pope than a public enterprise because he was selling so much real estate. He actually said he wanted to take people out on these canals and get them drunk with beauty and then sell them land. That was his motivation. And this fellow, this is one of the first African Americans to go down to Cypress Gardens. He worked on the property there. His name is Jim Doles. And I met his family. And some of his family members actually later worked at Cypress Gardens on the boats and also in the restaurant there. They had a restaurant that people loved to go to, and they only had a black staff, a black waiter staff, because that was the fashion at that time. And so they were probably some of the only African Americans that got to actually be at Cypress Gardens. Although there was a day once a year when a lot of attractions across Florida would open one day a year for African Americans to go to. But this family, the Doles family, got to go there before that. I think they went there in 1942. So now when Dick Pope opened Cypress Gardens, he gave up the idea of a city park and decided, okay, it's mine. He had to pay the WPA back, and then it was his. And so what he did is he had an opening day, and apparently he had like 30 opening days. He had opening days all the time. I was like confused when I started doing research. I'm like, what was the original opening day? Because there were so many of them, you know? It was his way of garnering publicity. He knew that he had to have something special, so if you call it opening day, you know, then people will show up. And so one thing, this little brochure here shows a couple of things that were going on at the time. If you notice, it says Cypress Gardens, Winter Haven Park, Winter Haven, Florida, near Bok Tower. Why do you think he puts Bok Tower on there? Because he wants you to know that there's more than just Cypress Gardens. You can also go to Bok Tower. He would advertise other places all the time because he knew that people would come there if they knew they had another place they could go to at the same time. And so he was constantly advertising other attractions, okay? And this lady, Gail Armour, she was a dancer, and I don't know if you can read the caption. It says, "Study in Knees" at Cypress Gardens. So she's got knees, and cypress trees have knees.
Hi, Luke. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
What was the Bok Tower?
Oh, the Bok Tower is over in Lake Wales. It's still there. Yeah, it's this rich dude, Edward Bok. It's really beautiful. He built this tall tower that has a carillon in it, and it's really beautiful. And it's made out of coquina, I think, and it's got all kind of designs on it. You should go out there.
It plays music.
It plays music. Yeah, it's a carillon. It has music in it, and it used to have a reflecting pond. I don't know if it still has that. Yeah, the first time I went, it was right after a hurricane, and so a lot of the trees got blown down at that time, and it was kind of a mess when I went. But it's really pretty, and it was built in the 20s. I'm pretty sure around in the 20s, and so people would go over there too. What I wanted to say about that picture is you can't really see it that well, but there's a walkway, and the walkway was actually made out of cypress wood blocks. Dick Pope had a sawmill down there somewhere, and they carved out these little cypress wood blocks and made the path. And here's another image of it. It's obviously that's gone now. The cypress wood blocks are gone, but you know, it was just really pretty. And here's one of the photos from the postcards. Dick Pope had about 25 photographers at one point. He says that he laid out Cypress Gardens using like his hands as a viewfinder. He wanted every place in Cypress Gardens to make a beautiful photograph. And so he used a photographer's eye, and he was a photographer too. And so you can kind of tell when you look at the postcards that he achieved his goal. You know, he wanted people to be able to make photographs and to then share them with their friends, and then they would want to come down too. Because that time period too, you know, that was the time of the Brownie Hawkeye, when people started buying, you know, little cameras that they could use, and tourists started buying these little cameras. And so it was kind of a new thing. to have cameras. And so that's what that was all about. And here's some of the beautiful girls. It says Blossom Time at Cypress Gardens. And initially at Cypress Gardens, they did have the girls wearing kind of fancy dresses, but they hadn't come out with a Southern Belle quite yet, though. That comes a little bit later. They would have the girls out there because one thing Dick Pope figured out was if you crown a queen, the press comes. He crowned 9 queens in one day, apparently. And I'll get to that in a second, but that was another part of the research that was a little baffling to me, was how many queens were there? There were a lot. And this was a photo that went out. It's called Florida Snowballs, because they're throwing gardenias. And this is an image of one of the stunts they did down there, just on a board, the clowns. And so this is Grantland Rice, and if you're probably of a certain age, you probably saw some Grantland Rice newsreels in the theater. And so the theater companies loved Cypress Gardens. Everybody loved it. Anybody that invented anything loved it that had to do with water. They would take it to Cypress Gardens, try it out, and get publicity. But they would film these little short newsreels of skiers, of all the aquatic activities they were doing, and then they would show them in movie theaters before they would show the movie. Okay, and in fact, that's how some of the skiers that came to Winter Haven found out about Cypress Gardens, through watching these newsreels. And in fact, one of their skiers, Alfredo Mendoza, came from Mexico. He had seen the newsreel in Mexico, and he decided he wanted to come up and join the ski team, and he did. He was kind of famous. And these are some more of the photographs, just advertisement for Florida. And this was a movie he made with Esther Williams, On an Island with You. And that was the first big film that was made there. And it was his first interaction with Esther Williams. Y'all know who Esther Williams is, right? She and Dick Pope had a very, I guess you could call it a love-hate relationship. Like whenever she came to town, especially when she got really famous, he would take her out in orange groves and have her pick oranges. Because he was also at one point was advertising for the Citrus Commission. But he always somehow Cypress Gardens was always in the picture, Like whatever he did, he always made pictures at Cypress Gardens. So he's getting paid. He's getting paid by the citrus people, but he's making the picture at Cypress Gardens, So there's no mistaking where it's made. So he's doing double dipping a little bit. This was a photo from the behind the scenes down there at Cypress Gardens. There's Esther Williams, all made up. And I talked to some people who were children when she came there. And apparently she and one of the other stars went to the high school dance and hung out with it, kind of showed up and danced around a little bit. And they were really excited about that. And some of them got to be in the film too. And there's pictures below Esther Williams, although I doubt that that's Esther Williams jumping. It's probably one of the guy skiers or something. They dug a deep hole there because it wasn't that deep, and so that whoever was diving wouldn't kill themselves. And the people down below were the high school girls, and they got to be in the film. A lot of times the Southern Belles were the skiers too. They did multitasking. They were also the queens. A couple of the skiers told me that they would be down doing a ski show, and Dick Pope would call down and say, "You're going to be crowned queen today. Come on up," And then they would go up there and do the crowning. So all this stuff was happening. Apparently it opened in 33, 34, 35, depending on which opening date you want to go with. And then the war came. Dick Pope enlisted. He was in the Army. And apparently he took a photographer with him. That's Dick Pope on top of a telephone pole, because he was a pole guy in the Army. I think at Camp Blanding maybe. And I know y'all probably can't read his handwriting, but he puts on there, he says, Julie, maybe the Sentinel could use one of these. Have a 5x7 or 8x10 sent them. Say something about how Dick Pope is, wait, I can't read it myself. Say something about how Florida oranges are on top and Dick Pope is still promoting them. And so he was always, and he's holding oranges in his hand, you know, he was always multitasking his promotions. And this is the time when he was away, he was in the military, and Julie, his wife, was left behind to kind of run the show. Okay, and one day the soldiers were coming there because Dick Pope was able to keep Cypress Gardens open during the war. A lot of places closed or they were used as bivouacs or something for the military, but he managed to keep it open, and he actually paid the gas for the soldiers to come there. So they were crowded with soldiers. And apparently one day the soldiers came down there and they saw some kids out there skiing and they thought there was a ski show. So they asked, when's the ski show happening the next time? And she goes, tomorrow at 3. So she invented it on the spot. And she got her kids, Dick Pope Jr. and some of his friends, and they put on the first ski show at Cypress Gardens. And another thing, writing the book was crazy because there were so many threads going on. You had Southern Bells, you had water skis, which I didn't really know a lot about. And water skis had just been invented too by 2 different people in 2 different locations at 2 different times. You know how that goes with inventions. So water skis were becoming popular, and Dick Pope actually, he wrote a book on water skiing. He wrote a whole book on it. He promoted water skiing as a sport in the state, you know, in the whole country, and it became very popular at that time. And so Cypress Gardens actually created a Cypress Gardens ski factory to capitalize on that, you know. So that's just part of there were a lot of different little threads that were part of this story. And there you can see how many soldiers actually came to, and that's the yacht club behind there, the clubhouse. And there they are, they're out there to see the show. And this is one of the queen crownings. As you can see, they have a big court. And the soldier got to crown the queen. And that was back in those days, first of all, we had newspapers, printed newspapers, and the newspapers needed material. And so Dick Pope, every time he took a photograph, he would send it to the paper and they would use it a lot of times because he had a very talented photography staff and they were interesting photos, you know. And so he capitalized on all those things. This is another photo of the soldiers out there at Cypress Gardens with the queen. You can see the backdrop. It looks like there's a B-47 or something on there. And there's the soldiers leaving and all the girls waving goodbye. They had dresses around for photo ops and stuff, but they weren't like the Southern Belles yet. So what happened is, this is a photo, and that tall thing there has a vine on it, the flame vine. Underneath that flame vine is a telephone pole. Because Dick Pope, he did telephone poles in the military. And so he knew how to do, you know, so then he's like, okay, I'll have some telephone poles laying around. I'm gonna use one. And that's what he did. And so he used the telephone pole to drape that vine on it. It became this gigantic thing. So there was a freeze down there in Winter Haven. And everything froze. And so Julie said, oh my God, nobody's gonna come in here. So she got the girls to dress up in those big Southern Belle dresses and to go out there and stand around. And so they would call them the flowers of Cypress Gardens. You know, there were Southern Belles, and there's a lot of funny Southern Belle stories. I'll get to a couple of those in a second. And this photograph, this is one of those double dipping photographs, postcards, because he's probably selling oranges in this photograph, but he's also selling Cypress Gardens. Because the Southern Belle became synonymous with Cypress Gardens. And so just by putting her in there, everybody, even though it doesn't say, it just says the Florida blossom among, grapefruits and oranges. It doesn't say Cypress Gardens, And here's another one, same thing. Notice all the oranges. And here's another one. They're grapefruit and oranges. The grapefruit are a little bit lighter, and so the oranges are brighter. Yeah, that's a good question. So there's more. And the one on that one, he's also got the clubhouse in there. So there's no confusion at all about where this photo is made. And these are some of the photo op situations with the girls out there. And, it was catnip to photographers because it was so pretty. It was beautiful. And Dick Polk he just really truly loved gardens, And so people, it just shows how much we've changed as people. That at one point, Cypress Gardens was more popular than the Grand Canyon. More people came there. It was the biggest attraction. And so much has changed since then with technology and bells and whistles and lasers and all this stuff, And so people, don't get into it as much. And these are the queens. It says that he averaged a queen, one for every flower that existed. He did 100 crownings a year. And so so this is me sitting at Bartow. They have a historical library there, and they had a lot of clippings from Cypress Gardens. And I was looking through this clipping book, and there was the cigarette queen, the rose queen, the ivy queen, the daisy queen. I'm like, oh my God, how many queens are there? So I finally, on about the 20th, stopped copying those because there was no end to it. And even one of us could be a queen. They had that. And these are some of the clippings that I had gotten. The camellia queen, the oleander queen, the egg queen, tangerine queen, and the queen of fiesta. So there's lots of queens. And here's the family I was mentioning to you. On Easter Day, Dick Pope invited them to the gardens in 1942, way before things were desegregated, and they were probably the first African Americans to go there. The family still had one of the little boys' little linen suits, and it was kind of cool. And they worked out there in the restaurant. They had a restaurant called the Palm Terrace, and they were waiters in that restaurant. And here's some more of the water skis and the aquamaids. And here's a very cool little film.
Pretty girls make a pretty picture. But where sky and water meet, you'll find water tournaments, beauty contests, festivals, and ski ballets. Together, these spell aquatic wizardry. And here at Cypress Gardens, Florida, ski schools start at any age, but the younger the better. The only requirement is ability to swim. This part of the curricula is called the ground school. After the chalk talks, our skilings learn proper posture and balance. All this and school, too? But don't get me wrong, these ski school marms not only teach water skiing, but are proficient in swimming, modeling, and acting. The first water test is always exciting. There are no ringers here. This is positively the first try on water for this bunch. Mass instruction works best because the kids have less tendency to allow their feet to spread. Watch the faces take on confidence as the kids gain experience. Water skiing is not difficult. Almost anybody from 6 to 60 can learn to do this well after a 1-hour lesson. Happy landings are easy too. You simply drop the rope and glide for shallow water until your momentum's out. A roughhouse is good for young water skiers. It inspires relaxation regardless of how you get tossed about. Water skiing plays no favorites. The girls do equally as well as the boys. let's watch a senior girls class make a practice run. Our cameraman insists it's easier to ski downhill, but we straightened him out. See you later, girls. How early should youngsters start skiing on their own? That's hard to say. But here's a 9-year-old outboard skipper towing a 7-year-old skier. He's just a beginner, but with this kind of concentration, he'll develop surprising skill. As soon as they learn to stay on the boards, next step is tricks. The pyramid makes a good starter in this department. They made it. Starting from 10 feet underwater, this scholar will demonstrate the art of shoe skiing. It looks easy, but actually they are prone to catching edges, which would cause a spill. Greater speed is needed for this stunt. Here is Alfredo Mendoza, one of the greats in water skiing, stepping lightly off the boards at 38 miles per hour. He doesn't need skis. His bare feet will do nicely. He says it's easy if you don't wiggle your toes. There's only one way to stop, just let go. This young lady is showing us the type of ski used for the single ski technique. Next is the regulation or two-ski type. It has less depth to the fin on the bottom. And the third is wider with no fin. It is used for turning and jumping. Hey, fellas, are you listening? The single ski technique, while different, is just as easy to perform. It has more grace and style and allows the skier to operate in wider angles. Let's watch Willa McGuire. She's led the women's world in water skiing for many years. Her artistry and skill have no equal on the aquatic hickories. Now, Willa tries the impossible, a ski ballet with no hand or foothold. A popular form of modern water skiing is sometimes called the romantic doubles. How about a kiss? No? Goodbye. Here's hoping this romantic pair have a happier ending. Alfredo is warming up again. This time it's for the jumps. He holds the world's record of well over 100 feet in board jumping. Let's watch him again in slow motion. Notice the arms do not rotate like on snow ski jumping. He's just sailing along. Alfredo's next is called the helicopter spin. He'll try to do a double spin. It's never been done before, and it takes nerve to try. Almost, but not quite. This time, the Mexican jumping bean will do a 1.5 spin on the ramp, landing backwards and completing the other half on water. Brother, this seems harder than the double spin. Alfredo doesn't like to get his feet wet coming ashore. The triple straight jump has crowd appeal. Once more for the cameraman. This is the shot he was after. Where's the third fellow? He's chicken, never jumped at all. Believe it or not, even water skiers get down with that old bugaboo monotony. When that happens, the boys play a little game. They call it the Cypress Gardens weave. Well, I hope they're all pepped up because I'm exhausted. Yes, water skiing today is a big sport, and here is a big send-off from the whole gang. So long.
So that's one of those newsreels that clearly is advertising water skis because they show them. And I don't know if you noticed on the swimsuits, they're Jantzen swimsuits. They have the little logo. Dick Pope always made sure he had a relationship with them too. Advertising, he advertised everything. Dick Pope he had appendicitis one time and ended up in the hospital. So he called his wife to bring a swimsuit up there to put it on. For them to take a photo of him lying in his hospital bed. The problem was that the Jantzen logo was on the wrong side. And so he had her take it off and then put it on the other side and then take a photo of him wearing a Jantzen swimsuit in the hospital. He was very, I hate to think of what he would have been like with the internet, because he knew how to make things go viral back in this particular time. He knew how to advertise and to get people interested and to get excited about things, He was a terrible speller. I had access to some of his handwritten notes, and they were always misspelled. But he was a genius. And one of his press guys told me that it snowed one time. It snowed down there, and Dick Pope said we have to get a photo, and so he went out on a park bench where all the snow was, and he wrote, "Believe it or not, it snowed," but he spelled "believe" wrong, and they weren't going to use it, But he was so excited, but his spelling was off. It didn't seem to hurt him. He was a millionaire, and he would go out. He had a new car every year, and I think they gave them to him, Cadillacs or whatever, because he was such a good advertiser. And apparently, he would go out with a paper, $10 bills uncut, and wash the windshield, for promotions and stuff. He was kind of silly. So the Cypress Gardens Aquamaids were on a lot of covers of magazines. I mean, it was unbelievable, really, how many covers of magazines. He had layouts in Life magazine, Look magazine. Every magazine in the country had big spreads from Cypress Gardens. It was very appealing. Look, the cover. And this image here, you're seeing in the film, it showed Willa Cook, who was she was an international ski champion, because by then, skiing became internationally a sport. And they hosted international tournaments at Winter Haven, and Dick Pope also sent those skiers to Europe, all over the country to do ski shows. So if you went to Cypress Gardens, you were likely to be able to travel the world as a skier, and it was a really exciting time for a lot of these people. And Willa was an international star. She was the first person, I think, to do jumping backward off a deck. I interviewed her. She had a little restaurant called the Holiday House over DeLand. I don't know if it's still there. But she told me that what these women are doing in this picture and what she was doing in the film is she was standing on that ski and turning around. There were no footholds on that ski. She's literally standing on a bare board and turning around and doing things. And it was called a jitterboard. And these women are standing on the jitterboard too. and they're going about 35 miles an hour in the water. And she told me that men just couldn't do it. You know, they just couldn't do it. So it was mostly the women that did it. It was pretty remarkable because you're just holding onto this thing and it's dragging you through the water. So it's pretty cool. So this is a Southern Belle who's also holding a magazine cut with her on the cover as a skier because she was also a skier. There's another cover, Life. And then he had this posted up in there too, Life, on the covers of magazines. So next comes the Florida pool. He built the Florida pool for Esther Williams. He built Esther Williams, I think maybe three different pools. One was in the 60s. It was an aqua pool. It was an aquarama pool, and it had windows in the sides so you could film. And Esther Williams had a really bizarre TV show down there. It's online. You can find it. It's kind of bizarre. But this photograph here has all the girls around the edge, the little swimmers. And I was talking to this guy named Bob Kehoe, and he was the finance manager at Cypress Gardens. And he goes, Lou, he goes, they needed like 100 girls or 50 girls or however many are on there. They didn't have enough, so he put on a girl swimsuit and went out there and participated to get the extra person. It was kind of funny. And these are some of the crowds. Initially, they didn't have the stadiums like they do now. They have the stadiums so you can watch the ski show. And originally, they just had, you just go down there and sit on the grass and watch the shows from there. And there's Esther Williams down there to film Easy to Love. And if you haven't watched Easy to Love, I encourage you to watch it. It's old Florida. It's kind of based on Dick Pope and Esther Williams, except there's a romantic connection they didn't have. But it was filmed at Cypress Gardens, and like Dick Pope said, it was an hour-and-a-half advertisement for him and his park, you know. I liked how the guys in the background, the kids, they're looking at her. And there's Alfredo Mendoza. He's wearing, he's the guy he was from Mexico, and he saw the newsreel and came up to Winter Haven. He doubled for Esther Williams in the film, in the jumping. There's a scene where she jumps, and he doubled for her in that and for some of the other more difficult stunts. Apparently she was pregnant when she was filming that. And Busby Berkeley, do y'all know who he is? He's a choreographer, very famous. Busby Berkeley choreographed the big ski scene in Easy to Love, where they have 48 skiers on like 6 to 8 boats skiing. And they also had a scene with Esther Williams where she was supposed to be skiing between these jets, these water jets that would go up. And she fell and almost hit one of them. And she got so mad, she wrote about it in her autobiography, that she paddled over to the boat where Busby Berkeley was and told him, if I had a pistol, I would kill you right now. She was so mad. And then they got the other people to do the doubling. And there she is in the pool, filled with, it looks like gardenias or something. And this is kind of an imitation from the film. And people made fun of Dick Pope for building that swimming pool. It's actually in the lake. It's a swimming pool in a lake. So it's kind of this, it was actually written up in Popular Science, or one of those engineering magazines, about how they did it, because it was pretty cool that they did it. And it is definitely, when I went to Cypress Gardens, I couldn't wait, to get down there to the Florida pool to see it. And it was smaller than I thought. I just pictured it being this gigantic thing. It's really not that big. And Dick Pope said, I'm going to build this pool. It's going to cost me a lot of money, and then I'm going to use it again and again and again and again, to do stuff with. And he filled it with oranges, put the Southern Bells out there, and he used it again and again and again. So it was cool. Now they started pitching Cypress Gardens because he had so many filmmakers in his Rolodex. He could get people to come down there. And so Dick Pope had a studio, and he called it Studio B. And the reason he called it Studio B was they would say, well, is Studio A available? And he would say no. only Studio B, because he would make them think he had another studio. He was really good at that kind of thing. And this was how he got the cover of Popular Mechanics. They were filming a Cinerama movie down there. Cinerama was like this crazy over the top. There were like 3 cameras involved, and it was 3D or something. And they did a shot down at, they did one down at Cypress Gardens. And of course, Dick Pope had ads all over the country. You know, your admission gladly refunded. And I don't think anybody probably ever asked to get their money back. And these are just some more of the postcards. And they had the boats. And the boat drivers were supposed to tell the audience, you know, what kind of plants they were looking at, okay? So I was talking to these boat drivers, and they told me they made up the names. They just made up stuff. They call it the Dicus popus plant, or the something halitosis plant, you know. They had a lot of fun with that. And these are some of the Aquamaids. And there's Willa with Dick Pope. And I think this was made for Life magazine, one of those. And obviously the piano is hollowed out. What happened though, when they slowed the boat down, the whole thing went in the water. And Dick Pope said, did y'all get photos of that? Because they were also used. You know, if there was an accident or something bad happened, he would try to turn it into something positive. You know, it was just the way he was. There's Willa doing her thing. And this is a little film. It's a little grainy, but you can get a sense of what Cypress Gardens was like then. And it's always interesting to me to see how dressed up everybody was when they went to Cypress Gardens. This was a home movie.
We arrived just in time to watch the famous Aquamaids, who have been featured in many movies, performing in the water ski show. Four shows daily the year round are performed by the Aquamaids, ski champions, and experts to please thousands of visitors. Such scenes as these can be photographed from a special camera pier with nationally known cameramen and photographers to assist all visitors. The show is over. Visitors now are walking in all directions. Some leave to go elsewhere, and others decide to walk through the winding paths of the garden. This is beautiful Cypress Gardens, with its beautiful landscape grounds, known the world over as America's tropical wonderland. Quiet electric boat tours take the visitors through the winding waterways and through flower bank canals for one of the loveliest boat trips in the world. Here, you will find thousands of the most beautiful flowering shrubs from all parts of the globe. Many different varieties in bloom may be seen no matter what the season. Rare and exotic plants form a paradise of beauty, and a mecca for millions of visitors each year.
You saw how the women would kind of sit around and people would take photos with them. Those dresses were used for other things too. Apparently, Julie was Dick Pope's wife, and she had a pair of red shoes that she wore sometimes, and they said if she wore those red shoes, you don't want to be around her. And so she didn't play around. So the skier, one time a skier was up flirting with one of the Southern Belles, and here they saw Julie coming down the sidewalk, and he got up under her dress and hid. That was one of the stories they told me. So that was kind of funny. And like I said, sometimes they were called up to be beauty queens too. So it's just funny. And there's Dick Pope advertising with his big sign, the ski shows, 4 a day. Really exciting. Some of the ads. And she mentioned the special place for photographers to sit, for people with cameras. What they did is when they built the little stadiums, Dick Pope noticed that the photographers in the crowd were standing up and getting in everybody's way. And so he built a special photographic pier, and he charged them to sit there. It was like a quarter, you know. You could sit there, and there were photographers on hand to help you set your camera so you got the right thing. And as you can see on there, it says black and white and color. It gave settings, and the skiers would go right by there so you could get a good shot. He wanted them to make good photographs because they were going to show them. He didn't want them going out with ugly photos, you know. So he was serious about it. This is one of those kind of press photos he did to send out. And if you paid to sit on the photo pier, you got the little pin. Your official guest photographer. And this is one of the ads they did. The truck, you know, there's Dick Pope in a big truck. And so people would advertise there all the time because it was so well known. You know, it was really a go-to place for all kinds of companies, from boats to cars to anything you could think of. And you saw this in the film too, the hang glider thing. I think on this one, the original one, they were literally hanging on to it. There wasn't like a strap. And a couple of times they crashed, and one guy ended up in the hospital after he crashed this thing into the water. So it was very dangerous, but later they had safety harnesses and stuff. And these are just some more photos I stuck in so y'all could see what they would be doing, skiing. The crowds on the lawn. And there's Dick Pope. As you can see, he's changed the seal of Florida. Do you see what he did? He's got the skis in there, and he's got a glass-bottom boat from Silver Springs in there. He wanted the state to contribute like $1,500 toward this. You know, but of course they said no. I think that's one of your private things. But he wanted them to help him. I think he tried to get money from the state for some of his pools he built too. He was a real promoter. And here he is with a yellow elephant, and he's wearing one of his flashy suits. This isn't the flashiest suit he wore. He had suits made for him. He wasn't very tall, and he said he wanted to stand out in the crowd. So most of the time they were very flowery and loud prints and stuff. And this was for the Mike Douglas show. Do y'all remember Mike Douglas? Well, Mike Douglas filmed a show down there, and I brought, after y'all can see some of these brochures, this is from the Mike Douglas show. Y'all can look at it after. Like Joey Heather. Do y'all remember Joey Heatherton? She came. Toady Fields, remember her? She came, all these people. So you can look at it. The governor, of course, was there, Mike Douglas. And as you can see in this photograph, you know who that is. It's Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali came down there and boxed, and then the guy Jim Doles, I showed you, well, actually it wasn't Jim Doles, it was another African-American guy that worked with Dick Polk. He took Muhammad Ali down to the African-American community in Winter Haven and walked him around the streets and introduced him to people. It was kind of exciting for them. I'll see if anybody knows who this is. Duke Ellington, yeah. Duke Ellington was there, and that's his saxophonist. Do y'all recognize this guy? That's Johnny Carson. And one of those skiers was the mayor, later became the mayor of Winter Haven, Dave Dersheimer. Dave was a character. But Johnny made a show down there. It was the only time he did a show out of the studio. He went to Cypress Gardens. And I think he was there for a couple weeks filming. And he got those guys to be human skis for him. Dave said that was the epitome of his life. It was like the biggest thing that ever happened to him. Yeah, so it was called Johnny Carson Discovers Cypress Gardens. And this is Fernando Lamas. It was from Esther Williams' TV show she did. She did a little TV show that was almost like an ad for a beer company. Because they didn't like break to go. The guy just started talking about beer. It was kind of weird. You probably can find it online. But it was a pool. It was a regular pool, but it had windows in the sides, and they later filled it in. And this is a scene from the show, underwater. And this is one of those inventions I was telling you about. This guy invented this boat plane thing, and they later used it in a Man from GLAAD, the Man from GLAAD TV. It was like a commercial, and he flew that thing in that. Now, I want to know if anybody in here knows, the short guy is Dick Polk. Does anybody recognize the guy in the middle with the white shirt? I'll give you 50 cents if you can tell me who that is. Nobody knows. That is Roy Disney. Roy Disney was scouting out locations for you know what. He was scouting out locations, and and I don't know if this was the story I was told, was that he came there, he's looking at it, and he goes in Dick Pope's office and calls Walt up and said, "You're not going to believe it. You know, they're charging $3 a head to look at flowers, and people are lined up." You know, it was like a thing, you know, so he knew he was going to do it somewhere in Central Florida. And Dick Pope, what do you think Dick Pope's reaction to that was, to the idea of Disney World coming to Florida? Do you think he was threatened by it, or? No, he wasn't. He wasn't. He thought it was going to be great. He thought it was going to be good for him and for Silver Springs, Weeki Wachee. Everybody was going to benefit. And so there he is over at Disney World by the castle. He's promoting it already, you know. And initially, like in some of the articles that were printed back then, the Disney administration was saying, you know, we don't want to take everybody's business. You know, we do want it to be, we want everybody to be successful. And that changed over the years because they kept adding more worlds. And then they built the hotels, and then they just really wanted people to come to Florida, go to Disney World and stay there for their vacation and not leave, okay? But initially it was actually good for the attractions. It was good for them because Disney World would only let so many people in it per day. And then the overflow would go to Cypress Gardens and would go to Weeki Wachee and would go to the other attractions. So initially it was actually a good thing, but that gradually changed. And so they built those, you know, the highway people always build new interchanges to get to new places. And so he kind of pitched, like, y'all can't leave us out, you know, you have to make one for us, you know, that links us to Disney World. So they had an interchange built there. And he's out there, he's got these Disney heads, I don't know if y'all can see them, little Disney character heads, because he's really embracing this. But before long it got bad. And this was when Dick Polk started going big with stuff, like he brought in big statues and big topiaries and big things like that to try to counteract the pull of Disney. This is when they brought in the big topiaries, and I don't know if they still have those out there, but they would make these giant topiaries. They were cool, you know. But that was his reaction to Disney World. This was happening about the same time, the Go-Go's. Now what I want to show you here is the skiing thing was huge, okay? And the skiers at Cypress Gardens created stunts that no one had, these were all like world-breaking records, they were breaking records with their stunts. Like how many levels is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 5. And it looks easy, they make it look easy, but they're doing this on water, okay? So they're climbing up on top of each other in the water, doing it. You can't take off from land like that, you know? So it's pretty remarkable. And they had a lot of skiers on the staff at the time. By the time I got there, things had gone a little south, you know, with how many skiers they had. And they had 3 skiers, 3 women skiers. They had some guys too, but that was the ski troupe. That was the Aquamaids that they had at that time. They were very generous to me. They let me ride in the boats with them during the show. It was exciting and it scared the hell out of me because they do this thing where they act like they're going to run into each other, the boats. And I thought they were, you know. So I had gone down there at the bitter end of Cypress Gardens, and the story got crazy because a guy came from Valdosta. He owned Wild Adventures, and he bought it. And it changed hands. It actually changed hands many times before he came along. It changed hands multiple times, and it's too convoluted to get into. But he bought it. His name is Kent Bisher. And I went down after he bought it to talk to him. And he sunk a lot of money into it, probably too much at the time. And then what happened to him, he went bankrupt. 3 hurricanes came through, one after the other. And that just kind of just tore it up. It deflated his idea, you know. So he ended up going bankrupt. And then it was like, what's going to happen? Is it going to be condos or what? And that's when these 2 real estate guys bought it. And everybody was sure they were going to flip the property and turn it into condos. But they sold it to Legoland. That's a photograph from the day they announced, you know, their thing. And I went down there because I had finished the book. I finished the book, and then this happened, and my editor was like, no, you're not done yet. And so I went back down and, you know, and interviewed them, and I thought it was a good fit. Legoland kept the original, well, the state of Florida preserved the original acres that were the park, you know, that were the garden. They're still there. And they have a sensibility, because this company also owns some places in Europe, some attractions that they have gardens. So they like gardens, you know. Now the Southern Bells are plastic now. They look the same almost. They almost look real, don't they? Those are Legos. And now instead of oranges, the park is filled with Legos. And they did, one thing I'll give them credit for is this pool was a mess when I went down there. The tile was broken off. They redid the pool. They fixed it and they opened it up so you could actually see it, which was cool. Because I think I don't know if I climbed over the fence or if the fence was knocked down at that time. And the skiers turned into Lego people. I don't know about that. But that's where it is now, and I didn't go back after it became Legoland. I probably need to go back over there. It's kind of breaking my heart a little bit because Cypress Gardens was such a fixture in Florida, you know. And like I said, they called Dick Polk the man who invented Florida. And that's like I could talk all day about Dick Polk and his ingenuity about creating, excitement for people to go and look at his place, and the way he promoted other people and the way he promoted Florida oranges. Like he was constantly doing it. And his daughter, I talked to his daughter, and she told me that on the airplanes when he traveled, he always carried oranges. And he's a guy that created, there was a little time, they had a thing called the Friendly Floridian. It was a little thing you could wear. It had the state of Florida. He would pass these out. He created this I don't know what you call it, a promotion or something. And whenever he would be on a plane, he would give out oranges to people and try to interest them in Florida, not just Cypress Gardens, but Florida, So he was a pretty cool guy. So now, do y'all have any questions? Or I know I kind of buzzed through this. Yeah, somebody in the back.
Okay, we used to have Legoland passes for 2 years. And they still have the Eye in the Sky, but they have a lot of rides there. Were any of those rides from Cypress Gardens, or are they all what Legoland put there?
Well, was that, okay, you're asking were there rides there? Kent Bisher brought in, he brought in that roller coaster. I don't know if it's still there.
There are some roller coasters.
The roller coaster he brought in was from Panama City, the Miracle Strip. It was one of the first wooden roller coasters in Florida. He brought that in, and I don't know I would guess if there's any new rides, they're probably from Lego.
Well, they kind of look old, but they put Legos on them.
Okay, they're probably, he had,
I wonder if they're not original to Legoland.
yeah, they probably popped in there when Kent Bisher came. Kent Bisher was really nice, and when I went down there, I did not know who he was. And so I came down to the main office, and this guy came up to me, and he's wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and he goes, I was going to go down to the photo room. They had an archive of photographs. It had been hit by the hurricane. The room was a mess. It was moldy, and I should have been wearing a mask, really, to go in there. So they said, this guy will take you down there. So I'm walking with him, and we passed the roller coaster, and I'm like, yeah, I rode on that roller coaster when it was at the Miracle Strip. And he goes, yeah, it's a really bumpy ride. It's great, And then when we got to the room, I said, well, I'm sorry I didn't get your name. My name's Lou. And he goes, I'm Kent Bisher. He never said who he was. It was kind of cool. But I felt bad for him, Yes.
Did Polk just kind of fade from the scene?
Well, his family had control of it. I think the son and the daughter, and I think one of them sold their stake in it, and that opened it up to other people coming in. So he had stepped out, and then he died, and things kind of changed, within the family. I wasn't able to talk to his son right at the time I started the book. His son got cancer and got really sick.
Is he still privately owned?
No, it's owned by Legoland now. Well, I guess that is privately owned. And the state preserved the original small little acres of of the gardens. And there's a banyan tree there that's enormous. I don't know if you've seen that banyan tree. It's huge. And apparently Dick Polk bought it for $3.50. And when Disney World opened, they have a banyan tree, but it's fake. Do you know that banyan tree? It's a fake banyan tree. It probably cost them, $300. I mean, however much money it cost. And he was going through there with the Disney guys, and he's like, how much did y'all pay for that? And they're like, oh, $500,000. And he goes, well, I got mine for $350, And he was known for going in people's yards and getting cuttings of flowers and stuff. He was famous for that kind of thing. Do y'all have any other questions? Or yes.
Who owns it now?
Legoland. Lego. Yeah, Lego. You got to go over there and check it out.
Like I said, I've been to Legoland a lot.
Okay.
Is the Florida pool still there?
Yeah, they refurbished it.
Because I didn't even know where it is. I've never.
See, there it is. If you go, it's it's kind of in a corner. It jets out into the lake. Like if you go where the banyan tree is and just keep going along the lake there, you'll see it. It's back in there. And I don't know if they leave it open. I imagine they probably close it off unless they're doing something that day, because I know they don't have lifeguards over there. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Did Polk have a background in marketing before he bought this, or were those just all his ideas? Like, did he have specific training? You said he had been up in New York.
He didn't have, what he had was his father, J.W. Walker Polk was a millionaire. They were real estate guys. He just had a knack for it, you know, like the real estate thing. There were boats there, so he would just, I don't know, he just thought, how can I get people to want to buy property here? And they would stage all those aqua things, like the jumping of the boats, because boats, all that stuff was kind of happening at that time. The speedboats and things like that were new, you know, so they would do this, like they would create water sports like jousting on the thing, like water polo or something, but with balloons, you know, and stuff for the newsreels. And so he just learned real quickly how to do it. Like he got the Chris Craft people to donate boats, and you know, he just knew how to market. I don't know, he was a genius at it, really. He just had I don't know, he almost had like he was very intuitive about those things, you know.
Did he ever have any lodging or own any lodging affiliated with the park?
No, they didn't, not to my knowledge, they didn't rent.
The hotel across the street, but I don't think they owned it.
Yeah, there was later there was a hotel over there. I think that might have come later. But yeah, they didn't, like, you couldn't, like, although there was a family that actually lived in that mansion at one time, the Snively family, and they were wealthy. And the Sniveleys were the co-creators of the Haven Villa Company. They had the millionaires. And there was a connection with Graham Parsons, the musician, and the Snively family and stuff. There's a lot of crazy, that's why that book got fatter and fatter. And I'm like, man, I gotta stop. Because the more people I talked to, the more stories I heard, and it was crazy, you know? Yes?
Were there facilities for the water skiers, the men, the women, did they provide them with some kind of housing?
Well, they did have cottages, I guess, or probably in the community, I think. I know Willa came from up north. I can't remember if it was Wisconsin. I think it was Wisconsin, because they have a whole ski thing up there. And Dick Pope came and recruited her, and she stayed in a little cottage down there. But she told me that Dick Pope made it sound like Winter Haven had streets of gold, you know, when she got there. She's like, they didn't have screens on the windows. And there were flies on the food, you know, that's what she said. She was funny. I met her at her restaurant. She was smoking a cigarette in the back. She's a internationally known champion, world ski champion, you know. Do you have any other questions? No? Do we have any skiers here or anybody that worked there? Usually there's at least one Southern Belle shows up, you know.
I do have. Did Ed would incorporate like clock towers or we'd watching in his? Did they reciprocate and do the same?
You know, I don't think they did the way he did. I think a lot of them had those mile things. Like if you go to Wiki Watcha, they might have one of those. You know, you're 40 miles from those kind of things. But he would actually include them in his advertising. Like he did with Bach Tower, you know. And at one point, Silver Springs had a fire, and he actually sent out a press release that Silver Springs is open for business, even though they had had a fire on the premises. And so he promoted them, you know, because he knew if they were successful, he was more likely to continue to be successful too. So he was open-minded and smart like that, you know. Any other questions? Y'all are very good questioners. Well, thank y'all. I appreciate y'all coming out.